Hey everyone and welcome to the channel. In this video I'll be replacing the fuel filter in this 1991 VP Commodore. The process will be the same for any second gen Commodore, so VN to VS. The reason I'm replacing the fuel filter is because this car's running a little bit rough. Unfortunately it won't idle properly and the only way to make it run is by forcing it to rev. Let me show you what I'm talking about. See, I'm forcing that to rev. As soon as I let off, it stalls. I also have no idea when the last fuel filter was put in. So before I begin ordering more expensive parts, I'm starting with the fuel filter because that's the cheapest and easiest thing to do. Also, since we'll be working with petrol, make sure you're wearing gloves not to get any on your hands. And make sure you're wearing some safety glasses. Trust me, you do not want to get petrol in your eyes. Ask me how I know. Okay, so what we want to do first is open the bonnet. Now you might be wondering why we need to open the bonnet when the fuel filter is at the back of the car. Well, I'll tell you why. We want to come over to our fuse box. Now the reason for this is we want to get as much pressure out of the fuel lines as possible. So what we want to do is pull the fuel pump fuse out and let the car run. This will stop the fuel pump from working, which will then stop pushing more fuel into the fuel lines, causing more pressure. We don't want to disconnect the fuel line only for it to be pressurized and put fuel all over us and the car. According to this fuse cover, the fuel pump is this bottom left one, so let's pull that out and go from there. Now we can crank the car for a little bit or until it stops running, whatever happens first. That should be enough. But be warned, there could still be pressure in the lines. That's why we wear safety glasses. Just for some added safety, let's disconnect the negative terminal on our battery so there's no possible chance of sparks. Now we need to jack the back of the car up. Now, just like every other time we jack up a car, make sure you put something under the wheels of the opposite end to stop the car from rolling. Now I put an axle stand under the axle so I don't have to rely on just the jack. Just like that. And slowly let the jack down. And it's the exact same process for the other side. So just up here, that's our fuel filter. Now I could probably squeeze under there and change it off camera, but since I'm making a video, I'm going to have to readjust the jacks just so I can film it and you get a better view. Now this is much easier. This right here is our fuel filter. We need to remove that. It's on the right side above the diff. So we need to undo these hose clamps and remove the fuel filter. I recommend using a rag as well to stop fuel from running down your arms. I bet that's going to put fuel everywhere. So there was a little bit of fuel in the lines, but thankfully it wasn't pressurized. That's why we did that trick with the fuse and letting it crank over for a little bit. And there's the old fuel filter. Now I want to show you something. This fuel stinks and not in the good way. So let's have a look at just how bad it is. Fuel should not be that color. That's why we're changing the filter. Now we can get to putting the new filter in. If you weren't sure on what filter to get, it's the Z200 by Ryco. We will be reusing these rubber hoses here to go into the new fuel filter. Now, an important note with fuel filters, they are directional. As you can see, there's an arrow that says flow, which means the flow of fuel needs to go that way. And here it also says out. So it would be positioned like this in the car. This is the fuel tank side and this is the engine side, because fuel goes that way. So with some editing magic, these hoses will be on that filter. Just like that. Also, have a look at this old filter. This filter has the date it was made printed on. So this fuel filter was well overdue for a replacement, being over a decade old. Now remember, we want this fuel filter facing that way because that's the direction the fuel will be flowing in. Okay, now everything's in place, I can begin tightening the hose clamps. That's nice and secure, so let's try starting the car and see what happens. To make life easier for yourself, leave the car up on jack stands when letting the fuel pump prime so it's easier to check for any leaks. So let's put our fuel pump fuse back in and reconnect our battery. Make sure to put the fuse box cover on. I don't see any leaks yet, so I'll let it prime again and leave the camera under the car so you can get a better view. I don't see any leaks, so let's try and start the car and see what happens. Well, unfortunately it hasn't fixed our stalling issue. And that right there is how you replace a fuel filter in a VP Commodore. Unfortunately that hasn't fixed the stalling issue, but replacing a decade-old fuel filter couldn't have done it any harm. So stay tuned for some more content on this VP Commodore. I hope you enjoyed the video and learned something new. Please consider liking and subscribing.